I want to start by reading a letter that we read at the city council meeting a couple of weeks ago from then Mayor Earl D. James. And it was written on December the 5th, 1969. And I'm going to read the entire letter, but I'm going to highlight a couple of points that I think are still salient issues to all of us in this room. It says, "Dear Mr. Mayor of the City of Montgomery, in the year 2019, what a great experience you are having this year, 2019, opening this capsule. I wish I could be around to enjoy the occasion and to see if our dreams of today, 1969, of the things to come in Montgomery have finally taken place. The people of Montgomery are very enthusiastic about the growth of their city. At the present time, we are a city of 163,000 people representing a new South and projecting our thoughts to a dynamic future. We expect to be a city of 250,000 people in 1975. We expect to be a city of 250,000 people by 1975. Next year, the Alabama River will be developed whereby barge lines can go from here to the Port of Mobile, Alabama, and then to all ports of the world. Our airport, Danley Field, has grown rapidly in the last several years. This growth will continue. Maxwell Field and Gunner Field, our military bases, play a predominant part in the economic, cultural, and educational growth of our community. This city has always been proud of its public school systems, and we are very proud that Auburn University is now located here and will open during the year 1971. Montgomery gives a lot of importance to its young people. Montgomery gives a lot of importance to its young people. It is our desire for our city to grow for these young people, and upon their education in higher institutions, for them to return to their hometown, find employment, and make their contributions to its welfare. Mr. Mayor, I hope your problems will be few and your blessings will be many. Sincerely, Earl D. James, Mayor." It is not the strongest or the most intelligent who survive, but those who are most adaptive to change. Over the past 10 years, the need for and focus on adaptability has accelerated. That's a quote by former CEO and chairman of American Express, Ken Chenault. And I bring that up on the heels of reading the letter because I think it's very important that we talk about the change that we're enduring here in the city of Montgomery, in the state of Alabama, and this nation. It's very important, I think, for us to understand where we are as a community and where we want to be. You know, some of you may know I played football growing up here in the community and was able to play Division II football in college. And at the time, 10 wins was a pretty good record for a coach to have. If you won 10 out of 11, that was about a 91% winning percentage. If you won 10 out of 12, that was about 83%. But now that the schedule has changed a little bit and games have been added, 10 wins doesn't mean what it used to mean. 10 out of 13 now puts you at about 77%. For those teachers in here, that's a C average. I don't think any of us want to be mediocre businessmen and women or mediocre leaders in anything that we do. But it's important for us to understand that the facts here in Montgomery suggest that what we've been doing here for the last few years probably is not enough for us to keep up with our competition. It's probably not even enough for us to make sure that what Mayor James wanted to see in 1975 will come true by 2045. And so we have to ask ourselves, as we think about this community, what do we want to be? How do we want to get there? And what are we willing to do in order to make it happen? And I think adaptability is something that we have to understand, that regardless of what we have done in the past, it's something that we're going to have to do more of in the future if we want to compete. When I think about Montgomery, Alabama, I think about cities in the New South that have outgrown and outpaced us over the last 20, 25 years. I'm not going back 50 years to the time this letter was written. I'm thinking about as recently as the time that I was graduating high school. And when I think about those communities, one thing that I've noticed about them is they've adapted. They've changed. They've evolved. They've been willing to take on best practices and do things that were outside the norm for themselves. They understood that diversity was a strength. They understood that it wasn't good enough just for the power to be held in just a few hands. They understood that it was not enough for us just to stay where we were because it was where it was comfortable. They understood that the challenge lied really in finding ways to compete, not just amongst ourselves, but amongst those in our region, and amongst those in our state and our nation. In today's economy, we are living in one that really has no geographic boundaries. We're living in an economy that is all about the recruitment of talent and resources. And if you don't have the talent, and if you don't have the resources, then you're falling behind. And I think in some ways we have fallen behind. And I think all of us have to look in the mirror to maybe see what could we have done a little bit different, and what can we do different going forward. And I'm a part of that. When I came back here in 2004, I tried to be on as many committees as I could, and I really thought my future here was going to be in small business. I thought I would be where many of you are sitting as a business owner and as a franchise owner, buying and selling franchises and growing those and employing a lot of people. But I realized before you get to third base, you got to get to first base. And we had the plans to get to third base and the home plate, but we couldn't get to first and second base. And that was because of a number of things that looked great in the business plan didn't quite work in the marketplace. It didn't matter that we had a Columbia-educated engineer or an Auburn-educated architect or a Vanderbilt-educated MBA. All of that went out the window. All of those things didn't matter because the marketplace was changing. And I think from a community standpoint, we have to understand that the marketplace is changing. We are competing not just with the Birminghams and the Huntsvilles and the Mobiles, but we're competing with the Columbia, South Carolinas, the Richmond, Virginias. We're competing with the Chattanooga, Tennessees. We're competing with the Louisville, Kentuckys. We're competing with cities all across this country, Frisco, Texas, and many places where your children and grandchildren are living right now, and where a lot of my friends and classmates are living. Some of the best that MPS could produce, some of the best that our state colleges and universities could produce. But they're going to these cities that are adapting and that are changing. And when you talk to business leaders in these places, they'll tell you, Stephen, what we did 15 years ago, we aren't doing now. We're already thinking 15 years down the line. And so to me, that means a more inclusive economy. That means an opportunity economy that gives everybody the chance to really achieve their level of success in every way possible, however it may be measured. Some may measure it by the number of employees, some may measure it by your payroll, some may measure it by happiness. Whatever it is, how are we providing that from the government standpoint? What are we doing to really put our finger on the scale to make sure that those folks who talk about what Monroe Street used to be prior to integration here in Montgomery, Alabama returns, where you had thriving minority and black businesses in this community, where you have more women-led CEOs and women-led organizations in this community. Many of the people that I talked to, and I talked to over the last couple of years, who are from Montgomery, they don't see this Montgomery. They don't see a Montgomery of cohesiveness, and they don't see a Montgomery of one that's really pushing together the government side working with the business side. They see a Montgomery that they may have grown up in that isn't like where they live right now in Florida, isn't like Charlotte, North Carolina, isn't like some places outside of Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia. They see a Montgomery that wasn't as open, that wasn't willing to adapt. And I think for us to understand where jobs are going, over 80% of jobs are now in cities. So smaller towns and rural areas are contracting. And younger people are going in even larger numbers than 80%. They're going to cities. So the question has to be, what are we going to be as a city? What are we going to be as a community? And what's going to be the narrative for Montgomery going forward? The history and the headlines of this last election are fantastic. That is great. But it's gone today, It's here today, and it's gone tomorrow. At the end of the day, what people really want to see is they want to see change. And they want to see this leadership and this community do some things differently. It's not just political. It's across the board change and adaptation to where we are. And I believe that we can make that change together. I think that we can do those things because I think that all of us want to compete, and I believe all of us like to win. And I believe all of us believe that if we're willing to do those small things, if we're willing to put aside our fear and believe in the faith that we talk about and show it and act on it, then we'll challenge some of these things that we've been talking about for a number of years. Now, I'm under no illusion that this is going to bring about a unanimous vote if I were to take it here in this room, or if I were to take it at my church, or if I were to even take it at my house. I know that all these topics people have various opinions on. And so I understand that it's going to take a lot of give and take in order for us to get where we want to be. But for Mayor James at that time, a city of 163,000 people, to have the faith that we would reach 250,000 people by 1975, there must have been some great optimism in this Chamber of Commerce. There must have been some great optimism in that City Hall. There must have been some great optimism in the city of Montgomery itself. And so for us, we have to understand if we aren't moving forward, then we aren't progressing. A lot of people take movement as progress. Movement is just motion. I can run in place, and that's not progress. But I need to be running going forward in order for there to be the progress that we seek. And that means all of us working together in an unprecedented fashion to look at where we are and to really ask ourselves, is South Carolina that much better than Alabama? So much so that the last 15, 20 years, it has blown the doors off of our state in terms of economic growth, population, and GDP. Is Charleston, South Carolina, Greenville, Spartanburg, are those places, Columbia even, where my friend Mayor Steve Benjamin has been there for 10 years, are they a better city than Montgomery? They're better state, better community. I don't think so, and I told Mayor Benjamin that last week at Harvard. We were there for new seminars of our new mayor, for new mayors, and so I told him my thoughts on that, but I want us to understand that this has to happen with all of us working together. And when we think about, in particular, cities in the South, cities that have had to deal with the racial fault lines in a way that maybe some other cities didn't have to in Denver, Colorado. Maybe some other cities didn't really have to adjust to in Seattle, Washington. Newer cities, cities that are not 200 years old as Montgomery is. Newer cities that may not have had some of the history that we've had, but newer cities that are growing and are attracting talent and resources at an unprecedented level. There's a book that I'm going to reference, and I hope that you all will take the time to read it. It's called The New Geography of Jobs. It's by an economist at Berkeley named Enrico Moretti. And he talks about what's happening between jobs and growth and talent, and which communities will survive, and which communities will thrive, and which communities will die on the vine. And he talks about the impact of the jobs and the innovation economy and what's happening. And it's something that I think all of us as leaders, whether we be business, whether we be government, academic, nonprofit, have to understand, because it filters in to the future of this community. The future of this community is not going to be decided by one election. It's not going to be decided by one man or one woman. It's not going to be decided by one body of government or one body of business. It's going to be decided by those of us in this room, the leaders in this community, the people who many in your organizations or your companies or your firms entrust to make sound decisions every day. Can we make those on a macro level from the standpoint of creating a better Montgomery? And so I want us to keep those things in mind, because as I was writing these notes, I realized I had enough for about 3 speeches. But you don't want to hear 3 speeches right now. So I'm going to break it up a little bit. And I'm going to conclude with this, because I'll be back, hopefully, in some capacity to talk to you again about where we go from here and how do we get there. I think we have to understand that in this economy that we're in this community that we're in, it's going to be important for us to work together, to make strong, decisive decisions and be willing to be uncomfortable. Be willing to be uncomfortable in our discussions, but more importantly, be willing to be uncomfortable in our actions. I think that we owe it to the people in this community. I think we owe it to those who were writing this letter 50 years ago, and I think we owe it to those who will come behind us to make the tough choices now and to make sure that we're not just celebrating what history we've made because of an election or what history we've made just because of our age, but we're making the history because of our choices, the results, and the impacts they have on the lives of people who live in Montgomery and the lives of people who live in the river region. I hope that you'll work with me on this over these next 4 years. I look forward to talking with you a lot more about some of the things that I think we can do together, because I'm convinced, I am ultimately convinced that if we work together, if we're willing to come out of our silos, if we're willing to come out of our corners of comfort, I am ultimately convinced that we can accomplish the greatest things that have been discussed, that have been thought about and talked about and not done over the last 50 years, and we can do that in these next coming years. Thank you so much for your support, and thank you for all that you do for Montgomery.